Have you ever noticed that the things you focus on, whether positive or negative, tend to grow in your mind? Think about it. The more attention you give to something, the more it takes root in your reality. This isn't just philosophy, this is the way human psychology and energy work. When you focus on an idea, a problem, or even a person, you give it life. Attention is fuel. It is the oxygen that keeps a fire burning. You might think that by ignoring someone, by turning away, you are starving them of power. But that's where most people get it wrong. Ignoring doesn't mean something disappears. It means it shifts into a different form. And that form is often stronger, more persistent, and even more influential than before. Let's break it down. What happens when you ignore someone who is desperate for attention? Do they simply walk away? Do they give up? Maybe in some cases, but more often than not, the opposite happens. They try harder. They get louder. They push further. The very act of being ignored intensifies their need to be seen. It magnifies their emotions, their actions, and their determination. It turns a small ember into a raging fire. Now let's take it beyond just personal interactions. Look at the world of business, marketing, social movements. Companies and brands that dominate are the ones that command attention. It's not always about having the best product or service. It's about capturing the mind share of the public. They know that if people are talking about them, even in controversy, they are still winning. They understand that attention fuels influence. Take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. Think about a time when you were deeply invested in something, a relationship, a project, a goal. The more you thought about it, the more it became part of your reality. Even if you wanted to move on, your focus kept pulling you back in. The more attention you gave it, the more power it had over your emotions, your decisions, your energy. Now, flip that perspective. If you're ignoring someone, thinking that you are taking power away, you're actually doing something else entirely. You're making them feel the void, and human nature despises a void. When a person senses that they are being overlooked or dismissed, their mind doesn't go blank, it becomes more active. They start searching for meaning. They start filling in the gaps with their own interpretation. And that interpretation is often more intense than reality itself. This is why silence is rarely neutral. When you ignore someone, you might think you're avoiding a situation, but in reality, you are allowing it to grow in ways that are beyond your control. You are feeding their obsession, their drive, their need to be recognized. Your absence doesn't erase them. It makes them more determined to prove their existence. In relationships, this plays out in countless ways. Ignoring someone to teach them a lesson often backfires. Instead of making them reflect, it makes them more desperate. Instead of calming the situation, it escalates emotions. Because when people don't get the attention they seek, they either work harder to get it or they internalize the rejection, letting it transform into resentment, determination, or even revenge. Let's look at the world of media and entertainment. How often have you seen celebrities or influencers rise to fame not because of pure talent, but because they understand the power of attention? Even negative press, scandals, or controversies often serve to elevate their platform. Why? Because people are still talking about them. The more you see their name, the more their influence grows. The more you engage, the more you contribute to their success. Now, let's bring this to a personal level. If you're dealing with someone who seems to be taking up too much space in your life, an enemy, a critic, or even someone you just don't want to deal with, you have to ask yourself, is ignoring them truly the solution? Or are you in some way still feeding their influence by letting them live rent-free in your mind? There's an important distinction here. Choosing not to react is not the same as ignoring. Being strategic with your energy is not the same as pretending something doesn't exist. The key is to control where your attention flows. It's about directing energy rather than letting it be hijacked by outside forces. If you truly want to take power away from something, it's not about ignoring, it's about deciding where your focus is most valuable and acting with purpose. Consider this in leadership. Great leaders don't ignore problems, they address them with intention. They don't avoid conversations, they steer them. They don't pretend issues don't exist, they take control of the narrative. The same applies in every aspect of life. If you truly want to shift power, you don't do it by ignoring, you do it by mastering attention. Understanding that attention fuels influence is one of the most important lessons you can ever learn. It shapes relationships, businesses, movements, and even the way you perceive yourself. Your focus is your currency, your energy is your resource, and the way you direct it determines the level of impact you create. Silence is often mistaken for neutrality. People assume that by not engaging, by not responding, by withholding attention, they are creating distance or diffusing a situation. But silence is never just silence. It is never an absence of energy, it is a redirection of it. And when you ignore someone, when you choose silence as your strategy, you are not eliminating influence. You are simply shifting the weight of power to someone else's interpretation. Think about it. What happens when you walk into a room, say something important, and are met with silence? Does it feel neutral? No. It feels loaded. It feels like a response in itself, even though no words were spoken. The human brain is wired to assign meaning to silence. In the absence of words, we create our own stories. We assign emotions, intentions, and narratives, whether they exist or not. When someone is ignored, they don't simply stop feeling. They don't forget. In fact, they start thinking more. They begin analyzing, questioning, obsessing over what that silence means. Does it mean rejection? Does it mean disapproval? Does it mean that they need to push harder to be acknowledged? Silence doesn't create neutrality, it amplifies emotion. This is why ignoring someone can backfire. Instead of shutting down a situation, it often makes it grow. The person being ignored starts to feel an even deeper sense of urgency to be recognized. Their emotions intensify, their thoughts multiply, and instead of moving on, they become more consumed by the absence of response. Let's take relationships as an example. In personal relationships, when one person gives the silent treatment, it doesn't dissolve the tension, it escalates it. The person being ignored doesn't just let go. They start internalizing. They start filling in the blanks with their own assumptions. Silence doesn't just withhold information. It forces the other person to create their own version of the truth. And more often than not, that truth is more extreme than the reality ever was. Now apply this to leadership. Leaders who remain silent in the face of challenges don't maintain control. They lose it. A leader who doesn't address conflict isn't seen as wise and composed. They are seen as weak or indifferent. Silence in moments of crisis isn't neutral. It's an open field where doubt, fear, and misinformation grow. When leaders refuse to speak up, others will fill the void, and what they say may not serve the leader's interests. Think about history. Think about movements, revolutions, and cultural shifts. Silence has never been neutral in these moments. When people in power stay quiet, they are sending a message, whether they intend to or not. And when people are ignored, they don't disappear. They mobilize. They amplify their voices. They find new ways to be heard. This is why in business, in social interactions, in personal growth, silence should never be mistaken for a passive tool. If you want to truly influence, you must understand the weight of your words, but just as importantly, the weight of your lack of words. Every time you withhold a response, you are creating space for someone else to interpret your intentions. You are allowing emotion to build, and you are surrendering control over how that emotion manifests. Let's bring this into everyday life. Imagine you send a message to someone, a friend, a colleague, a partner, and they don't respond. What happens next? Do you assume the best? No. Most people assume the worst. They start questioning, did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Are they ignoring me on purpose? Silence, instead of ending the interaction, creates an entirely new level of engagement in the mind of the person waiting for a response. It doesn't close the door, it makes them knock harder. And that's exactly why ignoring a person or a situation doesn't make it disappear, it makes it evolve. It gives it new meaning. It forces emotions to spiral in directions that are unpredictable and often uncontrollable. In conflict, silence is even more powerful. If two people are in an argument and one of them suddenly goes quiet, what happens? The argument doesn't end, it shifts. The other person now has to guess what that silence means. And usually they assume the most extreme possibility. Are they planning something? Are they furious? Have they given up? The silence becomes its own weapon, but not in a way that brings peace or resolution. It fuels more tension, more speculation, more intensity. Now let's go even deeper. Think about self-silencing. How often do people silence themselves because they think avoiding confrontation is the best path? But does it ever truly bring peace? Or does it just store emotions for later, letting them build up until they explode in a way that is far more damaging? Avoidance is not resolution. Ignoring is not erasing. Silence is not neutral. It is action disguised as inaction. It is a statement disguised as a void. And the more it lingers, the more power it gains in the mind of the one who is receiving it. Energy is never destroyed, it is only transformed. Every action, every thought, every emotion carries energy. And whether you realize it or not, that energy has to go somewhere. It doesn't just vanish because you refuse to acknowledge it. It doesn't disappear simply because you choose to ignore it. It redirects itself often in ways that are unexpected, uncontrolled, and sometimes even more powerful than before. This is one of the biggest misconceptions people have. They think that by ignoring someone or something, they are taking away its power. They assume that if they don't engage, the energy will dissipate on its own. But that's not how human nature works. That's not how energy works. When you refuse to confront something, you don't stop its movement. You simply let it find a new path, one that you no longer have control over. Think about water flowing down a hill. You can try to block its path with a rock, but the water won't stop. It will build up, gather force, and eventually carve out a new route. That's exactly how energy works in human interactions, emotions. When you ignore someone who is pushing for a reaction, you aren't making them go away. You're just forcing them to find a different way to express that energy, one that might be even more intense, aggressive, or persistent. This is why silence and avoidance are rarely true solutions. When you refuse to engage with someone who is desperate for attention, that energy doesn't die, it shifts. It intensifies. It finds new ways to manifest. Maybe they lash out in frustration. Maybe they double down on their efforts. Maybe they turn that energy inward and allow it to grow into resentment, obsession, or an unshakable determination to be heard. Now let's apply this to conflict. Have you ever had a disagreement with someone where instead of addressing the issue, they just shut down? They refuse to talk, refuse to acknowledge the problem, and refuse to engage? Does that make the issue disappear? No. It forces the energy of the conflict to transform into something else. Unspoken tension, passive aggressiveness, or an eventual explosion that is far worse than the original confrontation would have been. The same principle applies to emotions. If you suppress anger, does it dissolve? No, it festers. It grows inside of you, waiting for an outlet. You might think you've buried it, but in reality, you've only redirected it to another part of your life. It might come out in stress, anxiety, physical tension, or even in unrelated interactions where you lash out at people who have nothing to do with the original issue. The question then is not whether energy will move. It will move. The question is whether you are in control of where it moves. Are you allowing it to flow in a direction that serves you, or are you letting it take on a life of its own? This is why redirection is so powerful. Instead of ignoring energy and hoping it fades, you must take charge of it. You must be the one who decides where it goes. You must be intentional in transforming it into something productive rather than letting it spiral into something destructive. Let's take this into the world of leadership and influence. Great leaders don't suppress energy, they redirect it. They take conflict and channel it into resolution. They take opposition and turn it into motivation. They take doubt and transform it into action. They don't allow energy to stagnate or explode in unpredictable ways. They guide it, shape it, and use it as fuel to move forward. In business, this is how innovation happens. Some of the greatest companies in the world weren't built by avoiding challenges. They were built by taking negative energy, competition, criticism, failure, and redirecting it into something powerful. They didn't ignore obstacles, they used them. Now, think about personal relationships. Have you ever had a moment where someone was pushing for your attention? Maybe a partner, a friend, a family member, and you thought that by ignoring them you were diffusing the situation? But what actually happened? The energy didn't disappear, it grew. It turned into deeper frustration, resentment, or a louder attempt to be noticed. Ignoring didn't make the problem go away. It just sent the energy in a different direction, one that was no longer in your control. This is why understanding energy is so critical. When you are faced with a challenge, a person, or a situation that demands attention, you have a choice. You can try to suppress the energy, knowing that it will find a new path, one that may not benefit you. Or you can redirect it, take control of its movement, and guide it toward an outcome that serves your purpose. This is the difference between reaction and intention. People who react let energy push them around. People who act with intention decide where the energy flows. They don't waste it. They don't ignore it. They use it, mold it, and channel it into something meaningful. Power is not about being the loudest person in the room. It's not about reacting to everything that demands your attention. It's about control over your energy, your focus, and most importantly, your actions. Too many people believe that ignoring something is a form of control, that by withholding attention they are exerting power over a person or situation. But real power isn't in avoidance. It's in action, intentional action. It's in making the conscious decision to engage in a way that serves you rather than being forced into a reaction that drains you. Think about a game of chess. The strongest player isn't the one who makes the most moves. It's the one who makes the right moves. Every piece they shift, every decision they make is with purpose. There's no wasted motion, no impulsive choices. The person who acts with intention dictates the flow of the game, while the person who only reacts is always a step behind. This is true in every aspect of life. Power is not given to the person who shouts the loudest. It belongs to the person who decides how and when to act. The one who doesn't let circumstances dictate their behavior, but instead dictates the behavior of those around them by taking control of the narrative. Now, let's break this down. What does intentional action actually mean? First, it means understanding your desired outcome before you act. Most people move through life reacting to whatever happens to them. Someone makes them angry, they lash out. Someone ignores them, they become desperate for attention. Someone challenges them, they scramble to defend themselves. But these are reactions, not acts. They aren't driven by purpose, they're driven by emotion. When you act with intention, you ask yourself, what is the result I want from this situation? What action serves my long-term interests? What move gives me the most control over the outcome? Instead of getting pulled into an emotional game you can't win, you take a step back and make choices that actually put you in a position of strength. Second, intentional action means choosing how to direct your energy. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every challenge requires your attention. The mistake most people make is thinking that power means engaging with everything that comes their way. But in reality, power lies in knowing what to engage with and what to ignore with purpose. This is where a lot of people get it wrong. They assume ignoring something is an act of power, but the difference between power and weakness is why you're ignoring it. If you're ignoring because you don't know how to respond, that's weakness. If you're ignoring because you're afraid of confrontation, that's avoidance. But if you're ignoring because it does not serve your purpose, that's strategy. That's power. That's intentional action. Let's bring this into real life. Imagine two competitors in business. One company constantly reacts to what their competitor does, lowering prices when they lower prices, changing strategies whenever the other makes a move. They aren't acting, they are reacting. They are letting someone else dictate their choices. The second company, however, has a long-term vision. They aren't distracted by short-term battles because they are focused on the bigger war. They don't engage in every small fight because they know their energy is best spent somewhere else. Who is truly in control, the one reacting or the one executing a strategy with intention? Now let's apply this to personal relationships. When someone is trying to get a reaction from you, whether through insults, manipulation, or attention-seeking behavior, you have two choices. You can react emotionally, giving them exactly what they want, letting them pull you into a game on their terms, or you can step back, recognize their intention, and choose your response. And here's the key. Choosing your response doesn't always mean ignoring. It means controlling the narrative. It means knowing when to engage and when to hold back. It means deciding when your energy is best used for confrontation and when it is best used for silence that serves you. Not all silence is weak, just like not all engagement is strong. Strength is in knowing the difference. Think about a boxer in the ring. They don't throw punches just to throw punches. Every move is calculated. Every strike is deliberate. The amateur swings wildly, hoping to land a hit. The champion waits, watches, and delivers the knockout punch at the right time. That's the power of intentional action. This applies to personal goals as well. Most people want success, but they spend their energy on distractions. They react to every little setback, every minor inconvenience, every piece of negativity thrown their way. But the people who truly achieve greatness are the ones who act with intention. They don't waste their energy. They don't react to every little thing. They move with purpose. The world is full of noise, full of distractions, full of people trying to pull you into meaningless battles. But power does not belong to the one who engages with everything. It belongs to the one who chooses how, when, and why they act.